Hey YouTube, this is Jaden Storm, Country Team Shadowstrike, and this video is going to be kind of an instructional video on things that you can expect from the cross players or when you play the deck. I've done this a couple of times before, and some of you seem to like it, so I thought I would do it on this deck since it's going to be around in the format, and it's easy. It's in my opinion, the best deck of the format. So let's just jump straight into it. So to start this off, let me get my camera situated here. I want to talk about the strides for a second, and so if you guys checked out my deck profile, you know that this is my stride lineup. Now, I know that the X costs a little bit of money, but I was sent a question, and it was, is there a way to make this deck budget? Well, whenever you're talking about the best deck of the format, or at least in my opinion, it's hard to necessarily take a deck that is generally going to cost a little bit more money than the others and make it budget. But I told them that one of the easiest ways to do that is to simply, you really don't need stride in this deck, guys. Now, I'm not saying if you don't have the option to not play it, because it's safer to play it, but realistically, this deck does not need it. Like, if you look at the New World Paladins and the Oracle Think Tank and the Nova Grapplers, they need it. Or even Gear Chronicle. It feeds them. But this deck feeds itself by having, you know, a mix of some of the best Overlords in the game. So it really, Stride is kind of just an afterthought in this deck. Now, so I told him, you know, because he said, well, what was the most important thing first? And, well, obviously, this right here is probably going to cost you the most money. Is the ends. Now, you can try and get the ones from the Fighter Collection. They're a little bit cheaper. I've always stockpiled this card because I knew Bushiroad was going to eventually give it more support, and I was right. I have 4 play sets of this card, so I have my ends, you know, and I only have actually one from the Fighters Collection that was given to me by a friend, but, this is obviously where you want to put most of your money in. Like, this one's SP, but you can get these right now for about 25 a piece as a triple rare, give or take. You know, but you really don't need stride. You can go extremely budget on this and be fine, because all stride is in this deck is it's kind of like just another weapon. If you really want to, you don't need Root Flare. You really don't. You could just take Root Flare out of the equation. As much as I love, you know, Root Flare because he looks like Shinron, I may only use him once every 10 games because the cross gets all my work done for me. And if I do stride, my first stride always is Muhammad. That's because it gives me a setup for my Root Flare if I ever choose to use it, and also because it's early game, and he's a good early game early stride. But if you wanted to go budget, you could simply just take away these Root Flares here, make 2 more of them Muhammad, and put in 2 Harmonics Messiah. If you just wanted to get the deck done and say you had the deck done, you could do that and not need Root Flare. Even though if you had, because unless you have at least 2 Root Flare, his skill's worthless to you. You have to have at least 2 Root Flare to even activate his skill. So you just need to. This would be my last priority, would be the Root Flares, in all honesty, as much as I love him. But, so, I mean, it's not as needed as some of the other things in this deck are. So, for the strides, guys, make this your last priority. Next, we're going to talk about the starter. Now, ever since they banned Conroe, this has kind of stepped in and took his place as the premier starter for Kagero. Now, there's some deck builds out there I've seen that are trying to run another starter because they don't like this because it's only 4K, and if you boost to 7K, it only hits 11, so your opponent in the early game can drop a 5K for a 1-pass or a 10K for a no-pass. But the reason this guy is so crucial to the beginning of the game is because this deck revolves around grade 3. So, what this does is it gives you just another way to search for an extra cross or an extra end and add it into your hand. And the 2 great, like for grade 3 lineup, this is something I was asked was, okay, you have your 4X, that's a given. Then you have your 3 ends, and then you have your two greats. Now, someone asked me, well, why specifically is this your reason? Well, okay, you have your 4 cross. This is your boss monster, and you're going to need him because you're more times than not going to hit than hit. Now, as for the ends, the way this works is, okay, when you Legion, you're allowed to search out either the X or the end. You're normally going to search out the end, even though my rule of thumb is normally to search out the one that your opponent does not think that you do not want them to think you have. But because there are some people that play 4 end and they don't play any great, and the reason I don't like this is because if you do not want to have to ride the end first, because if you literally just ride the end, you're kind of setting yourself back. And plus, in realistic, you don't want these to flood up your hand. You really don't. As powerful and as good as this card is, and it's one of my favorites, you just don't want it to flood your hand because it will literally screw you over. And as for the greats are kind of like a backup. Say you just for whatever reason don't see the X. You can, if you draw into this, it's at least second best, and you do not want to ride the end. I mean, there have been times where I have the end in my hand, I'm about to ride to grade 3, and this is the only grade 3 I have, and I just won't ride. Because if you do ride the end, it sets off it just screws everything up. But generally, when I draw my first 5 cards, or before I do my mulligan, if I get a copy of the cross, I hold on to it. But that's my reasoning. And also, you can go into the great normally when you're ready to finish the game, because your opponent will have to worry about basically 2 attacks. Which adds 4 attacks total that they have to deal with if you have a full field, and that can really be hard for them to guard with, especially if you've depleted their hand using the cross, blowing up their field that they've had to replace, or they took it and then you've had the end and then you attacked and then they had to manually guard it to save their soul, so in the end, in my opinion, the 9 grade 3 version is the better version, because it just gives you more options, and plus you play cards in this deck that require Overlords to be around, like Burnout. This right here is going to ensure that Overlords are around. I mean, there are some times where, like, I'll have rode the X, and I'll be in Legion, and I'll have, say, this in my hand. Well, that's not necessarily a bad thing. You can pitch it with a perfect guard. You can use the X's skill. Sometimes I'll even call this as a rear guard, just so my opponent will kill it and put it in the drop zone. But it's weird, guys, I know, but this is how the deck's best worked. It's just kind of, you have to choose what you want to risk the most. And as much as I would love to be able to play 4 copies of the end, I do not want to have to ride the end first. That would be disastrous. Because even if I have a 7k boost behind him, that means the most he'll ever be is 18, and that doesn't do anything for me. So it's best to only play the 3, because that means I have a higher probability of drawing one of the grade 3s that I'd rather ride, obviously the X being first choice, because you want to get into the X in Legion as fast as possible. Now, for the grade 2s, this right here is where you're going to see the X decks having most of their power, because the X has access to the best grade 2s now that Kagero's ever had. Your Burning Horn, Burnout, and Neoflame. This right here is one of the more underrated cards. It's hard to decide, because the one that you want to run 4 of guaranteeingly is Burning Horn Dragon, and that's because you do run some lower level grade 1 power units, and if you stick this behind, that's still 17, so you're still hitting magic numbers. As for your last grade 2s, it's a matter of, do you want to have Neoflames or Burnouts? The reason I say Burnout is because it lets me recycle my Overlords, and it lets me pop anything on the board. Even though you can essentially, combo these 2 together, by, say, calling a Neoflame here and a Burnout here, a Burnout retiring something in the column in front of Neoflame and then using Neoflame to pop the same thing. I just don't want to... for me, it's mainly to conserve counterblasts, but if you want, you can play 3 Burnout and 4 Neoflame, if that's what you'd rather do. Or if you really sincerely want to drop one of these and play a 4 Burning Horn and 4 Neoflame, you can. I just would not recommend that. The next topic that comes up with the X decks is the Perfect Guards. Now, the reason... You have the option of playing this, or you can play Baree, or any Rampart Dragon, Baree, Rampart Dragon, Maria, and Rhino Cross. You have the option of playing... There's 5 different Kagero Perfects out there, but this one is the newest one, and then you have the other 4 from the old days, or the older ones. The reason that people, some people kind of toy over this decision, because if you ever go up in the mirror match, this card will hurt you, because generally if you are playing the mirror match, they might attack your rear guard just to get a cross restand, but in all honesty, guys, I still think this is the best option. I understand this can only protect your Vanguard, but in all honesty, if your opponent is willing to waste one of their attacks and a Persona Blast just to kill a rear guard and draw 2 cards that could essentially be dead, I'd rather take that risk than be without this, because they let me unflip damage, because you do counterblast in this deck quite a bit, and I want to have as much unflipping power as I can. And it's just my choice. There are some players out there that only play Baree or one of the older ones, and I've also seen some where they'll play 3 of this one and then like 1 of the other ones just to tech it, but to me that's pointless. It's better just to do this, but you can, you can do what you want. I'm just explaining my reasoning. Gojo's, I'm not going to go into explaining why Gojo's a good card. For the rest of your grade 1s, it's kind of customizable. Like this right here I have just as another way to unflip. This card right here, I know this might seem weird put in here, seeing as I told you Stride in this deck is an afterthought, but the reason I do play 2 of these, in case I do want to Stride and I have this in my hand, I can just do it instead of dropping one of my Overlords. But sometimes dropping one of my Overlords for Stride's not bad if I have a Burnout in my hand, because then I could just put it right back in the deck. So essentially I didn't do anything except Soul Blast 1, which could wind up helping me Legion. And then for the last grade 1, is Calamity Tower. Now, Calamity Tower is so good in this deck that Japan has put this card to 2. And the reason, you can still play 4 of this here in the States if you really want to, but the reason I don't is if you play 4 Calamity Tower and you have to ride it, it will hurt so bad, because if this is your starting if this is your first grade 1 and you go first, or even if you go second, you get to attack with it on your opponent's next turn, they're going to rush the hell out of you, because this is so easy. It's so easy to hit 10 and force out either a lot of guard out of your hand, or, which is going to be the more likely case, you're just going to take a lot of damage. But the reason this card went to 2 is, say you are in Legion. Say you have an extra cross in the hand, say we have an end, a crit trigger, a heal trigger, and just for argument's sake, I guess a perfect guard in the drop zone, okay? Okay, so say we ride another X. The reason Calamity Tower was banned was or put to 2 is you can go Calamity Tower, Soul Blast those 2 Overlords, and put them in your drop zone. Then what you can do is simply go, okay, I'm going to Legion back these 2, and then I'm going to put these 2 back in the deck. So essentially what you're doing is you can go search out Overlord, search for the X, or if you need him, you can search out the other copy of the end in your deck. So, and then you just put, you also get to put a couple triggers back. So it's a win-win. That's why that card's banned. People were literally playing 4 copies of this, and I can see why. But in all honesty, guys, I think the most I would ever play is 3. Just for the simple fact being, let's say this was my opponent's starting field, so he only has a 9k column. What the next thing I would do is I would literally, if it was my turn, I would go, okay, I'm going to call this, I'm going to ride this, I'm going to call this, I might even call some boosters just to make it bigger so it's less likely that he can guard it, and just push my opponent to an early 3-4 damage, and that right there can really give you a head start, and it can really just put them in so big of a hole before they even ride grade 2, and they're at 4 damage. I've seen it happen before. I've done it to people who play more than 2 of this. By playing 2, you're still going to see it. There's not one game where I don't see this. Because you thin this deck pretty quick with searching out your Overlords when you Legion, looking at the top 5, and drive checking and drawing. You're going to see this. I know occasionally maybe sometime bad luck will strike and both of them will go to the damage, but that's not going to happen very much. So playing 2, you're still getting to do that piece that what they call the loop, but it's not going to. Because also keep in mind, you have to have soul to do it, and I do know what you're saying. Well, if I'm in Legion and I re-ride, I have to. Well, that is true, but I don't want a situation where I literally have too many of these in the back row, or just a lot of these in my hand, and I don't have other units that I can use to, say, call for attackers, because this doesn't do much for you except draw you an extra card. As much as I love this card, I might test play 3 just to see if I like it, but I test played 4 once online, and every single time this would be sometimes the only grade 1 I drew, and except for like maybe my perfect guard, and I'll ride the perfect guard over this. So it's just it's kind of like it's kind of just one of those things. But 2, it's gonna be fine for you. Now, the last thing is your triggers. Now, obviously, the crits we're not going to argue, but see, I have 8 here. Normally, with my Kagero decks, for those of you who watch my deck profiles quite a bit, they play. I normally play 5 draw triggers. Now, some people, they play, say, 3 Gatling Claws and 2 Artipeak, and I can see why, because Artipeak does go into the soul, it gives you more soul, and you can use it to help when you want to do a burnout play. But I'm just... It's kind of scary having that many draw triggers, because you go through this deck so fast. Which I think you could get away with 5 and still be fine, but it's just my choice. I might try the 3 Gatlings and the 2 Artipeaks maybe, but I don't know. But anyway, guys, so let me show you one thing. What your opponent is generally going to do, especially when they know that you're going to stop it, say they know you have a perfect in your hand, you will see them call a Neoflame when they're going to do a mass retiring. So let's say their field looks similar to this. Here's my great ones. So let's say our field looks something like... Let's say our field looks something like this. Okay? So, remember the turn that Neoflame is called. If a unit in the same column as him is retired, you can counterblast 1 and destroy another card in that column. Now, that does not mean by effect. That means by any way. Say if this Burning Horn over here attacks the unit that's in front of Neoflame, that counts. If that unit dies, counterblast 1, kill the unit in the back row, and then Neoflame can go after the Vanguard. Or even if Neoflame kills the unit in the front row, then counterblast 1 to destroy the one in the back. But the reason for that is our opponent will go, bam, and then they'll go, say, 27 to your opponent's Vanguard. Well, say they nullify it. Check the twin drive. Bam, and, you know, bam. Okay, so then they're going to use the cross skill to blow up 2 units. What they'll do is they'll just make sure they blow up 1 unit that's also in Neoflame's column, destroy that, and then basically they destroy 3 units. And then if they want, they can just simply move this into the soul and unflip the 2 damage they just flipped to do all that stuff. So, this deck sometimes can seem unfair just because it has so many options. Like I said in my deck profile, the one thing that makes this deck scary is normally when it comes to your opponent's Vanguard, they either have a skill of when they don't hit or when they do hit, and they have one for both of those. So, and what's scary is when you know your opponent has both of these in their hand, because it gives them an advantage over you. It lets you know that if this attack ever gets through, you're going to see the end stand. You're going to see it attack again. So, essentially, guys, this deck, you have to kind of pick your spots. There's the best way I know how to compete against this deck, guys, is you cannot give them a field to go to work on early. If you give them field and they start blowing it away early before you even get a chance to stride, you're in trouble. Because this deck keeps a hand pretty well. Because honestly, when I stride, half the time I'm not doing it to get off my effects. Because like I told you, I always stride into Mahmud first. Unless I haven't strode all game, my opponent's at 5 damage and they're almost out of cards, I'll go into Atmos then. But 99 out of 100 times, I'll go into Mahmud and just swing for 26, maybe with a boost, and literally just get 3 cards to my hand and maybe get through to pop a unit. So this deck, it can regenerate its resources so quickly just from this combo being able to Legion every turn if, you know, everything falls into place right. So with the ability to, you know, recycle all our triggers, it's something you just have to test play against, and you just have to keep going, because this deck will extinguish your resources pretty quick if you do not figure but at the same time you can't call some people say, well, fine, if I just won't call rear guards. Well, if your field is literally just a Vanguard swinging, your opponent has nothing to be afraid of. Because without rear guards, you're gonna end up using all those cards to guard, or you're just gonna lose. You need to find a happy medium, and because this deck is hard to beat, it does. If you haven't played against this deck yet, I highly suggest you find someone who has it and ask if you can just play a couple test hands against it. Just so you can kind of get a feel of it, because if you're planning to go to the Team League in Pasadena, this is still going to be there. So just keep that in mind. I hope this helped you guys somewhat. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe, thumbs up this video, share it with your friends. If you have any questions, feel free to put them down below, and I'll be happy to answer them and give you my opinion. So thank you very much, guys. I'll see you next time.